The words are still lodged in my chest, like thorns I can't cough out. If anyone here knows why these two should not be joined, speak now. Most mothers cry tears of joy when their sons stand at the altar. I wanted to cry too, but my tears were sharp and poisoned. I wasn't just the mother of the groom that day. I was the keeper of a secret so heavy it almost snapped my spine. And when I finally opened my mouth, when my voice cracked across that church, the walls of my family's life came tumbling down for everyone to see. But before I tell you what I said, you need to understand how it all began. Because betrayal doesn't come out of nowhere. It creeps into your home, wears familiar faces, eats at the foundation of everything you thought was safe. It started a few weeks before Elijah's wedding. I'd always been proud of the kind of man my son had become. Steady, ambitious, a little shy in ways that reminded me of myself. He was 28, an engineer with a promising future. And when he brought Madison home for the first time, I saw in her eyes that eager spark of a young woman who knew she'd been chosen. She had confidence, a polished laugh, the kind of composure that made me believe she came from good stock. My husband Franklin adored her instantly. That didn't surprise me. Franklin has always had a weakness for charm. He'd been a charmer himself back when I first fell for him in college. Handsome, confident, with a grin that could talk its way out of anything. Over the years, that grin had smoothed over late nights, small lies, unkept promises. I excused it all because I loved him, because I wanted to believe that 30 years of marriage meant we were unshakable. But then, the little things started. One afternoon, I found Franklin in the kitchen with Madison. He was teaching her how to make his famous jambalaya. Nothing strange about that, except his hand lingered a little too long on hers as he guided the knife. She laughed a little too brightly at one of his old stories, and when I walked in, they stepped apart as though they'd been caught doing something far worse than cooking. "Mom," Madison said quickly, her cheeks flushed. "Franklin was just showing me how he makes the roux." My husband smiled that old smile, the one that had charmed me for decades, and for the first time in years, it didn't make me feel warm. It made me feel cold. I told myself I was being paranoid, that it was just nerves about the wedding. After all, wasn't I the one who had always been accused of overthinking? Franklin loved me. Madison loved Elijah. That was the order of things. That was the truth, but truth has a way of cracking when you least expect it. A week later, Elijah came to me late at night. He sat on the edge of my bed, his face pale, his voice trembling. "Mom," he whispered, do you think she really wants to marry me?" My heart clenched. "Why would you even ask that, baby?" "Because," he said, staring at his hands, "I see the way she looks at Dad. Like he hung the moon. Like he's the one." I wanted to laugh, to scold him for such a terrible thought. But the memory of that kitchen scene stopped me cold. I forced a smile, rubbed his shoulder, told him it was just wedding stress. "You're overthinking," I said. "Madison chose you." But when he left the room, I sat awake until dawn, listening to the sound of Franklin's steady breathing beside me, wondering if my son's fears were more than just nerves. The turning point came 3 days later. I'd gone out into the garden to cut roses for the rehearsal dinner. My hands were sticky with sap, my arms scratched with thorns, when I heard voices drifting from the living room window. I crept closer, holding my breath, heart thundering in my chest. It was Franklin. And Madison. "We can't keep doing this," Madison whispered, though her voice was tinged with laughter. "Why not?" Franklin's voice was low, coaxing, the same tone he'd once used on me when we were young and reckless. "Because," Madison said, "Elijah will notice. He's not stupid." Franklin chuckled, that smooth, dangerous chuckle. "Let him notice. He's too wrapped up in his own head to do anything. Besides, you and I, we've got something real, don't we?" Silence. And then, the unmistakable sound of a kiss. My knees nearly gave out. I pressed my hand against the siding of the house to keep from collapsing. My husband, my son's fiancée, together, laughing, kissing, betraying not just me, but Elijah too. I wanted to storm inside, to scream, to rip that moment apart. But something held me back, a strange icy clarity. If I confronted them then, they'd lie. They'd spin their stories, deny what I heard, make me doubt my own ears. No, I needed proof. That night, I told Elijah everything. His face went white as bone, his jaw clenched. Then he reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a folder. Inside were photographs. Franklin and Madison at a hotel bar, leaning too close. Franklin's car parked outside her apartment at midnight. Madison slipping into his arms in the shadows of a restaurant parking lot. "I've known for weeks," Elijah said, his voice breaking. "I hired someone. A private investigator. I didn't want to believe it, but here." He pushed the photos into my hands, and the truth burned through me like acid. We sat together in silence, the kind of silence that changes people. Elijah was no longer just my son. In that moment, he was my ally, my partner in grief. "We can't just let them get away with this," I whispered. His eyes, usually so gentle, hardened into steel. "We won't." For the next several days, we planned. I confided in my sister Aisha, a retired police officer who still had friends in the right places. She helped us collect more evidence, bank records, hotel receipts, text messages Franklin thought were deleted, but then Aisha uncovered something that made my blood run cold. Franklin hadn't just been unfaithful. He'd been reckless with our finances. Secret withdrawals, forged signatures on loan documents, even a second phone line we didn't know about. He wasn't just cheating on me. He was gambling with the future I had worked so hard to build. And then came the final blow. Buried in the investigator's report was a detail none of us saw coming. Franklin had a child, a daughter, 15 years old, a child he'd never told me about. I remember staring at the DNA report, the words blurring as tears filled my eyes. Probability of paternity, 99.99%. My husband, the man I had built my life with, had been living another life all along. By the time Elijah's wedding day arrived, I was hollowed out, my nerves stretched to breaking. But I knew one thing. I wasn't going to stay silent. Not anymore. When the officiant asked that fateful question, "If anyone here knows why these two should not be joined," I rose to my feet. 300 heads turned. Franklin's face drained of color. Madison's smile froze. I opened my mouth, the words trembling on my lips. And that's when the screen behind the altar lit up. Instead of the slideshow of baby photos we'd prepared, another set of images appeared. Franklin and Madison in a hotel lobby, time-stamped receipts, screenshots of messages, the damning DNA report. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Judge Ellington, Madison's father, stood up in shock. And Franklin, my husband of 30 years, turned to me with fury in his eyes. What happened in the next 10 minutes would tear our family apart forever. But I'll tell you that in part 2. Before I continue, if you're watching this and you've ever been betrayed by a spouse, by a friend, by someone you trusted, leave a comment saying, "I understand." Because sometimes just knowing someone else has walked through the fire can make the flames a little less consuming. And don't forget to subscribe to Aunt Clara's Tale, because the next chapter of this story will shock you even more than the first. The sanctuary was so quiet you could have heard a feather fall. People froze in their seats, staring at the screen as the images changed one after the other. Franklin's arms wrapped around Madison in a hotel lobby. His credit card slips for late-night charges at places no married man had business frequenting. The DNA results of a teenage girl no one had ever seen before. Madison gasped audibly. Her carefully painted smile cracked into something raw and ugly, and she clutched at the bouquet in her trembling hands as if it might anchor her to the earth. Franklin's face went scarlet, then drained to a sickly white. His jaw twitched, his eyes darting around as if searching for an escape hatch in the church walls. Whispers started in the pews. First a few murmurs, then a wave of voices. Someone let out a sharp, disbelieving laugh. Judge Ellington, Madison's father, a man of reputation and stern honor, was on his feet now, fists balled, his eyes locked on Franklin like a man ready to strike. And me? I stood taller than I had in years. For 3 decades, I had bent myself to fit the shape of Franklin's world. His charm, his excuses, his betrayals I didn't even recognize as betrayals at the time. But that day, That day, I was steel. "Elijah," I said softly, turning to my son, who stood at the altar frozen in horror. "It's time." He lifted his chin, his hands trembling as he pulled a stack of papers from the inside of his jacket. His voice cracked as he spoke, but it carried through the church. "These are the receipts," Elijah announced. "The proof. My father, my own father, has been with the woman I was supposed to marry." Gasps rippled through the guests again, sharper this time. Someone in the back whispered, "Lord, have mercy." Madison's bouquet slipped from her fingers, petals scattering across the aisle like a trail of broken promises. She stumbled back, shaking her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. "No, Elijah, please. It's not what you think," she sobbed. But Elijah's eyes, my gentle boy's eyes, were cold now, colder than I'd ever seen. "Don't lie to me, Madison. We have the photos, the messages, everything." Franklin finally found his voice, though it was thick with rage and desperation. "Clara, Elijah, this is madness. You don't know what you're doing. You'll ruin us." I turned to him, my voice calm, almost eerily so. "No, Franklin. You ruined us. I'm just letting everyone see the truth you tried to bury." The officiant stood frozen, hands gripping his Bible like it might fly away. Guests whispered, some craning their necks to get a better view, others covering their mouths in horror. The entire town was here. The church was full of neighbors, co-workers, cousins, people who'd known Franklin as a pillar of the community. And now they all saw him for what he was. Judge Ellington stormed down the aisle, his face red with fury. He pointed at Franklin with a trembling hand. "You disgraceful man. You dare touch my daughter while she's engaged to your son? In my house? In front of God?" Franklin opened his mouth, but the judge wasn't done. He turned on Madison, his voice shaking. "And you, Madison, I raised you better than this. You've shamed our family. Do you realize what you've done?" Madison fell to her knees, sobbing. "Daddy, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." But Judge Ellington didn't move to comfort her. He shook his head slowly, like a man watching a bridge collapse, and then walked out of the sanctuary without another word. His wife followed, her face pale as ash. The silence that followed was unbearable. Finally, Elijah turned to the guests, his shoulders trembling, his voice breaking. "There will be no wedding today, please. Everyone go home." Slowly, painfully, the crowd began to disperse. Some people lingered, whispering, casting pitying glances at me, others shaking their heads in disgust at Franklin. But eventually, only a few of us remained in the church. Me, Elijah, Madison, and Franklin. Madison reached for Elijah, but he stepped back like her touch was fire. Don't you dare touch me." His voice cracked, raw and broken. "You were supposed to be my wife. And you chose him?" He pointed at Franklin, his hand shaking violently. Madison's tears came harder. "Elijah, I didn't mean for it to happen, I swear. It was a mistake." "A mistake?" Elijah's voice was nearly a shout now. "You kissed my father. You slept with him. You looked me in the eye and told me you loved me, all while sneaking around behind my back. That's not a mistake, Madison. That's evil." Franklin stepped forward, his hand raised as if to comfort Elijah, but I moved between them. "Don't you dare!" I spat. "Don't you dare lay a hand on him. Haven't you done enough?" Franklin's mask cracked then. The charm was gone, the excuses gone. What was left was anger. Pure, unfiltered anger. "Clara, you don't understand. You think you've exposed me, but you've just exposed yourself. Do you think people will see you as a victim? No. They'll say you were too blind to see, too weak to keep your family together." I looked at him, my heart no longer trembling but hard as stone. Let them say what they will. I would rather be a blind fool than a heartless betrayer. Elijah gathered the papers, his hands shaking, then shoved them into Franklin's chest. "Get out. Get out of this church. Get out of my life. Get out of her life. You're nothing to us anymore." Franklin staggered back, his face twisted in something between rage and grief. For a moment, I thought he might lash out, but instead he turned and stormed down the aisle, the heavy church doors slamming behind him with a thunder that echoed like a final judgment. Madison tried again to approach Elijah, crawling on her knees across the aisle. "Please, please, give me another chance. I was weak, Elijah's voice broke into a sob. "You destroyed me. There's no chance left, And with that, he left too. My son, my only boy, walked out of the church without looking back. That left Madison and me. Just the two of us in the wreckage of what should have been her wedding day. She curled into herself on the floor, sobbing so hard her shoulders shook. I wanted to hate her. Every fiber of me wanted to scream at her, to tear her apart with words sharp enough to scar. But instead, I just looked at her and said softly, "You may have thought you were playing with Franklin's heart, Madison. But what you really did was shatter Elijah's. And some things don't heal." She looked up at me then, her mascara running, her face twisted in anguish. I never wanted to hurt him. I love him, I do. Love? I shook my head. Don't speak of love. You don't even know what it means. And I walked out, leaving her kneeling on the cold church floor. But the story didn't end there. Because when you expose a man like Franklin, he doesn't go quietly. He fights back. He claws at whatever he can reach. And over the next weeks, the battle for the truth would drag me, Elijah, and even Aisha into a storm bigger than we ever imagined. And that's what I'll tell you in part 3. But before I share that, let me just say this. If you've ever had to choose between staying silent or speaking up, between keeping the peace or telling the truth, you know how heavy that choice can be. Write in the comments. Truth is heavy, but silence is heavier. Because maybe your words will give someone else the courage they need to stand up. 2. And don't forget to subscribe to Aunt Clara's Tale. The next part is where Franklin shows just how dangerous a man like him can become when his lies are ripped away. The house felt haunted after the wedding that never was. Every room echoed with silence, yet it wasn't peace. It was tension, dread, grief. I kept catching myself staring at Franklin's empty chair at the dinner table. And though I should have felt relief that he was gone, the absence only reminded me of how deep the wound ran. Elijah barely spoke for days. He moved around the house like a ghost, shoulders slumped, eyes hollow. His laughter, the laugh I'd known since he was a boy, vanished. I tried to reach him. I made his favorite meals. I knocked softly on his door. Sometimes he'd sit with me, but the silence between us was thick with pain. Aisha, my sister, came by often. She was a rock, but even rocks crumble under the weight of betrayal like this. "Clara," she said one evening, her voice firm as we sipped tea in the kitchen. "Franklin won't just disappear. Men like him, narcissists, liars, they always come back swinging. You need to be ready." She was right. Because within a week, Franklin began his counterattack. It started with whispers around town. At the grocery store, I overheard 2 women at the checkout line. "Did you hear?" one said, leaning close. "Clara's the reason Franklin strayed. Neglects her husband. Too busy coddling that son of hers. No wonder he went looking elsewhere." The words stung like whips. I turned my head and they dropped their eyes, pretending they hadn't just slandered me. Franklin was planting seeds, I realized. Twisting the story, painting himself as a man starved of affection, driven into temptation. And people believed him. Next came the financial blows. Letters from the bank revealed debts I never knew existed. Franklin had drained joint accounts, taken out loans in my name, maxed out credit cards. My hands shook as I unfolded statement after statement, realizing how much of my security had been stolen. I sat on the floor that night, surrounded by papers, tears dripping onto the bills. Elijah found me there. His eyes darkened as he took in the chaos. "Mom," he whispered. "He's not just trying to ruin you. He's trying to bury you." The final straw came when I received a court summons. Franklin was filing for divorce and demanding half of the house, half of my retirement savings, spousal support. Spousal support after 30 years of my loyalty. It was like being stabbed by a man I'd already bled for. I turned to Aisha. "How do I fight this? How do I even begin?" She looked at me with that steady cop's gaze. "We fight smart. We gather evidence. We use the truth. You've already exposed his affair publicly. Now, we expose the rest." So we dug deeper. Aisha's old connections helped us access Franklin's gambling records, shady business dealings, tax evasion. Piece by piece, the man I thought I knew unraveled into a stranger. A con artist, a liar, a parasite. But Franklin wasn't the only one unraveling. Elijah was too. One night, I heard the crash of glass from his room. I ran in to find him pacing, fists bloody from punching the mirror. His reflection lay shattered across the floor, shards glinting like icy tears. "I'm nothing, Mom," he sobbed. Madison didn't just cheat. She picked him over me. My own father. What does that say about me? That I'm less than him? Worthless? My heart broke. I pulled him into my arms, rocking him like I did when he was little. "No, baby. Listen to me. This isn't about you being less. This is about Franklin being broken, and Madison being weak. Don't you ever confuse their sins with your worth." But even as I said the words, I knew wounds like his don't heal overnight, and then Madison reappeared. She showed up at my door late one night, her face gaunt, her eyes swollen from crying. "Mrs. Clara, please," she whispered. "I need to talk." Everything in me wanted to slam the door, but something, maybe pity, maybe curiosity, made me let her in. She sat at the kitchen table, twisting her hands. "I've lost everything," she said softly. "My father won't speak to me. People spit on me when I walk by. And Elijah?" Her voice broke. "I know he'll never forgive me, but I swear I loved him. I got caught in Franklin's web." I narrowed my eyes. "You were old enough to know better. Don't paint yourself as a victim, Madison. You made choices." Her tears spilled. "I know, and I regret them every day. But I need you to know, Franklin promised me things. He said he'd leave you, said we'd start a life together. I believed him. And then when it all came crashing down, he turned on me too. He's not done, Mrs. Clara. He's dangerous. Please, be careful." I studied her face, trying to see the truth in her eyes. Was this remorse or another manipulation? I couldn't tell. But her warning chilled me. Because 2 nights later, I woke to the smell of smoke. Flames licked the edges of the back porch, spreading fast. I screamed for Elijah, and together we grabbed the fire extinguisher, dousing the flames before they reached the house. When the fire department arrived, they confirmed what I already suspected. It wasn't an accident. Someone had poured accelerant. Someone had tried to burn us alive. Elijah's fists clenched. It was him. It had to be Franklin. We called the police, but without clear evidence, they couldn't press charges. Franklin denied everything, of course, acting shocked and appalled when questioned. But I saw the flicker in his eyes when our paths crossed in court a week later. A flicker that said, yes, it was me. And next time I won't miss. The divorce proceedings were brutal. Franklin arrived with slick lawyers, trying to paint me as unstable, Elijah as delusional, Madison as a confused young woman. But Aisha had come armed with files thick as bricks. She laid out his gambling debts, his secret daughter, his fraudulent loans. When the judge read the evidence, Franklin's facade cracked. For the first time, he looked cornered, but men like Franklin don't go down easy. After the hearing, he cornered me in the courthouse parking lot. His voice was low, venomous. "You think you've beaten me, Clara? You haven't seen the half of it. If you destroy me, I'll drag Elijah down with me. I'll make sure he never works again, never finds peace. You'll lose everything." I stood tall, though my knees trembled. "The only thing I've lost is the illusion of who you were. And that was never worth keeping." He leaned in closer, his breath hot on my face. "You're playing with fire, Clara, and fire burns." Then he walked away, leaving me shaken, but more determined than ever. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, listening to Elijah's soft sobs down the hall, replaying Franklin's threat in my head. He was dangerous. He had nothing left to lose, and that made him capable of anything. The question was, how far was I willing to go to protect my son? And that answer would come sooner than I ever expected. Because the very next week, Franklin made his boldest move yet, and I'll tell you what happened in part 4. But before I do, let me ask you this. If you were in my shoes, would you fight fire with fire? Or would you walk away and let him destroy himself? Leave a comment with your answer, because sometimes, hearing how others would handle it helps you see your own path clearer. And don't forget to subscribe to Aunt Clara's Tale, because the next chapter of this story is where Franklin goes from betrayal to outright war. I should have known Franklin wasn't finished with us. Men like him don't fade into the background. They claw their way back, even if it means destroying everyone around them. The week after court, Elijah finally went back to work. He was shaky, not himself, but I was proud of him for trying. He needed something to hold on to, something outside the wreckage Franklin had left. I thought maybe, just maybe, we were turning a corner. But then, Franklin made his move. It started with a phone call from Elijah's supervisor. I'll never forget the tone of his voice, strained, apologetic. Mrs. Johnson, I don't know how to say this, but someone's been spreading things. About Elijah, about you. The company board received emails with disturbing claims. My heart dropped. What kind of claims? That Elijah stole money from project accounts. That he's unstable, dangerous. There are even accusations of inappropriate behavior with female coworkers. I nearly dropped the phone. That's a lie. My son would never— I believe you, he cut in. But HR has to investigate. Elijah's suspended until further notice. I hung up in a daze. Within the hour, Elijah stormed through the front door, his face twisted with rage and humiliation. It was him. It was Franklin. Who else would do this? He threw his jacket against the wall, his voice breaking. Mom, he's trying to destroy me. I pulled him into my arms, though he shook with anger. We'll clear your name, baby. We'll prove it's all lies, but proving it wouldn't be easy. Franklin had covered his tracks well, using anonymous emails, forged documents, even fake testimonies. He was fighting dirty. That night, Aisha sat with us, her jaw tight. This isn't just about revenge anymore, she said. This is about control. Franklin can't stand that you exposed him, Clara. He's trying to regain power by taking Elijah down. I looked at my son. His eyes rimmed red with fury. Then we fight back harder, I whispered. We find out everything he's hiding. We shine a light so bright he can't crawl back into the shadows. We dug deeper, and what we uncovered was worse than we imagined. Franklin had been laundering money through shell companies, using Madison's name, and even Elijah's signature on fake documents. He was building a case to frame his own son for fraud. The fire on our porch, the debt, the lies. It was all part of a larger plan to ruin Elijah so thoroughly that no one would ever believe him. The more we uncovered, the more I realized Franklin wasn't just dangerous, he was desperate. And desperate men are unpredictable. Then came the night I'll never forget. I woke to a sound in the hallway. Slow, deliberate footsteps. My heart slammed in my chest. Elijah was asleep, his door closed. I grabbed the baseball bat Elijah kept by his bed and crept into the dark hallway. And there he was, Franklin, standing in the shadows, his face half hidden, his eyes glinting. What are you doing here? I demanded, my voice shaking but strong. He smirked, stepping closer. This is still my house, Clara. You think you can erase me? You can't. I gripped the bat tighter. Get out before I call the police. He tilted his head, almost amused. Police? With what evidence? You've got nothing. And when I'm finished, you'll have even less. Elijah will be ruined, and you'll be begging me to come back. I swung the bat, not to hit him but to make him back off. I'd rather die than beg you for anything. His smile faltered then, and for the first time, I saw the man behind the mask. A man crumbling, furious, cornered. He leaned in close enough for me to smell the whiskey on his breath. You'll regret this, Clara. You'll regret ever crossing me. Then he slipped out the back door, vanishing into the night. I collapsed against the wall, shaking. Aisha called the police, but by the time they arrived, Franklin was gone. After that, I knew we couldn't stay passive. Franklin wasn't going to stop until we stopped him, so Aisha came up with a plan. We set a trap, she said. If Franklin thinks he's untouchable, we make him prove it. We bait him into exposing himself. It felt dangerous, risky. But what choice did we have? We decided to use what Franklin wanted most, money and power, as the bait. With the help of Aisha's police contacts, we staged a business opportunity. A fake investor, a fake deal, everything tailored to tempt Franklin into making one of his shady moves. And he took the bait. Franklin showed up at the meeting, slick as ever, dressed in a suit, flashing that grin that had fooled me for decades. He signed fraudulent documents, boasted about how easily he could forge signatures, bragged about his connections. All of it was recorded. When the police stormed in, Franklin's face went from smug to stunned. He tried to bolt, but Aisha's friends were ready. They had him in cuffs before he hit the door. For a moment, I felt relief wash over me. Finally, it was over. Finally, he'd face justice. But Franklin wasn't done. Not yet. As they dragged him past me, he locked eyes with me, his voice low but chilling. "You think this ends me?" "No, Clara, this ends you. You and Elijah. I'll make sure of it." Even in handcuffs, even exposed, he still had that venom. And deep down, I knew he meant it. The trial that followed was chaos. Franklin's lawyers spun lies, painted him as the victim, even tried to blame me and Elijah for conspiring against him. But the evidence was strong. Too strong. Still, Franklin had one last card to play. On the second day of trial, a girl was brought in. A teenage girl with eyes so much like Franklin's it made my stomach twist. His hidden daughter. Her mother had come forward, claiming Franklin had promised to support them, but now they were left destitute. The girl stood trembling, staring at Franklin like he was a stranger. It broke something in me. Because in that moment, I realized Franklin's betrayals weren't just mine, or Elijah's, or Madison's. They stretched across years, across lives. He had left scars everywhere he went. The jury saw it too, and when the verdict came, guilty on multiple counts of fraud, forgery, and endangerment, I felt a weight lift from my chest. But even as the gavel fell, Franklin turned his head, locking eyes with Elijah. "This isn't over," he mouthed. And I believed him. Because sometimes prison walls don't contain a man's poison. Sometimes the damage lingers long after the sentence is passed. And that's what I'll tell you in part 5, the final chapter. But before I do, let me ask you this. If you had the chance to put someone who betrayed you behind bars, would you take it? Even if it meant dragging every secret into the light? Leave a comment and tell me. And don't forget to subscribe to Aunt Clara's Tale, because the ending of this story will show you that even after betrayal and destruction, there can still be something like hope. I never imagined that by the time the wedding night was supposed to end in joy and champagne toasts, my world would be cracking apart faster than I could even hold the pieces. The night air was heavy, thick with the perfume of roses left wilting in vases on the tables. The music long faded into silence, and the guests gone. Only the shadows of the aftermath lingered, and so did I, standing alone in the house that suddenly felt so foreign. But maybe I should start not at the very end. But with the last thread of hope I clung to before everything twisted beyond repair. That night, after seeing my husband with her, my son's fiancée, I told myself I had to keep calm for just a little longer. Pretend. Breathe. Wait. Because if I exploded too soon, everything would unravel before I was ready. And yet, who is ever really ready for betrayal to come crashing down on their head? I wanted to believe there was still a chance for clarity, maybe an explanation that would somehow dull the knife sticking out of my chest. I wanted to believe my husband hadn't been lying to me. My son hadn't been unknowingly betrayed by the two people who were supposed to stand beside him, and that I wasn't a fool for loving a man who'd been carrying secrets in the dark. But each step deeper into that night made it harder to keep pretending. When I looked at my son, his smile, the way his eyes searched the crowd for his fiancée, it was like someone was squeezing my throat. He had no idea. Not a clue that the woman he was about to bind his life to had already bound herself to another, and not just any other, but his father. My husband, his role model, the man who taught him how to tie his shoes and drive a car. I kept quiet. I swallowed my screams. But every laugh that came out of her mouth felt sharp, like glass grinding into my ears. And when his hand brushed hers across the table, and she pretended not to notice but her eyes sparkled with something unspoken, I thought I might collapse. The hours dragged. The toast came and went. Plates of food passed untouched in front of me. Guests asked if I was okay, and I smiled that fake, frozen smile I'd mastered through years of surviving in a marriage that hadn't always been tender, but at least was supposed to be loyal. And then came the moment that almost broke me entirely. The cake. Everyone gathered around, cameras flashing, voices cheering. My son stood behind her, his hands gently resting on hers as they held the knife together. It should have been sweet, A symbol, a start. Instead, I caught my husband watching her. Not the way a father-in-law should. Not the way a man at his son's wedding should. It was a look too soft, too familiar, too damning. That was when I knew there would be no going back. No pretending. Later, after the guests had thinned out and the music was just a ghost in the air, I followed them. Yes, I followed. My heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I stepped quietly through the hall, my shoes barely touching the carpet. I saw them, together, too close, his hand on her arm, her face tilted toward his, her voice hushed but trembling. I froze. I shouldn't have seen it, but I did. Not here, she whispered. Someone will notice. Let them, he said. And his voice, my husband's voice, was so thick with something I couldn't even recognize anymore. Love, obsession, madness. I ran before they could see me, my hands covering my mouth, my chest burning. I couldn't believe what my ears had heard, what my eyes had seen. That night, lying in bed staring at the ceiling, I thought about every sign I had missed. Every business trip that had gone longer than expected, every late-night phone call, every shift in his demeanor when she entered the room, and suddenly it all came together like a cruel puzzle I never asked to solve. Days turned into weeks. I stayed silent, but silence ate me alive. I watched my son plan his future with her, his heart wide open. And I watched my husband sneak glances, send texts, disappear for hours. The weight of the secret sat in my chest like lead. But secrets don't stay buried forever. It all came crashing down one rainy afternoon. I had gone to clear out the laundry when I found it. His jacket, and inside the pocket, her necklace, the very one my son had given her for her birthday. I knew it because I helped him pick it out, a small heart pendant, delicate but meaningful. And there it was. In my husband's pocket, I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. My body shook as I clutched that necklace in my palm. And in that moment, I realized the betrayal was no longer speculation. It was real, physical, tangible. I wanted to scream. I wanted to confront him right then and there. But something darker pulsed through me. A cold determination. I wasn't going to let him manipulate me. Not again. I wasn't going to let her pretend she was innocent. I began to plan. For days, I acted normal. I cooked dinner, smiled at neighbors, kissed my husband goodnight. But inside, I was sharpening the edges of my resolve. Because if they thought they could fool me, if they thought they could betray both me and my son without consequence, they were wrong. Dead wrong. The opportunity came quicker than I expected. A family gathering, everyone under one roof, laughter, chatter, drinks flowing, and there they were, pretending like nothing was wrong. My son, so happy, so blind, and them, exchanging looks they thought were subtle. That was when I decided I wasn't going to hide the truth anymore. I rose from my chair, my heart thundering. The room quieted slightly as people turned toward me. I lifted my glass as if to make a toast. My husband's eyes flickered with confusion. Hers widened with nerves. I opened my mouth. But then something stopped me. Not fear? No. Something else. Because right at that moment, as my lips parted, the door opened. And in walked a woman I had never seen before. She was young, pretty, and she held a little boy by the hand. The room fell silent. You could have heard a pin drop. The boy looked no older than 4. And he had my husband's eyes. Every breath in the room froze. My son stared in confusion. My husband's face went pale. The fiancé's mouth dropped open. And me? I gripped my glass so hard I thought it would shatter. The woman cleared her throat. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she said softly, her accent laced with sorrow. "But I thought it was time you all knew the truth." And just like that, the world shifted again. Because suddenly it wasn't just my husband and my son's fiancée. It wasn't just betrayal between the 3 of us. It was bigger, darker, a secret child. A stranger carrying evidence of years of deception right into my living room. Gasps filled the air. My son stood, his face twisted in disbelief. "Dad?" he whispered. My husband's mouth opened, but no words came out. His hands trembled. And in that thick, suffocating silence, I realized the nightmare wasn't anywhere near over. It was only beginning.